Hi everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand registered not-for-profit charitable educational trust called Common Knowledge. And I'm continuing this series with you in childbirth. And today I'm going to talk about hospital births. Um, this series really is my being able to leave a legacy in this bizarre field called childbirth conversation, because I've been involved in the conversation for 50 years. And I've seen a lot of changes. So I know from the experience that I've witnessed locally and nationally and internationally that we are where we are now because of things we didn't put in place back then when I gave birth in 1970. I gave birth in 1970 in the United States, and there were no legal midwives in the U.S. Some people were having home births, very few. They were attended by labor and delivery nurses, obstetricians, GPs, Vietnam paramedics, lay midwives, nobody. But the majority of us birthed in the hospital. And at that time, there were the standards of care, or the evidence-based practice, or the guidelines of practice that were used at that period of time. Those have changed. In fact, since 1970, we are now in the third evidence-based practice. And our trust is located in New Zealand, where I've lived for many, many years. And their maternity system, since 1990, became a midwifery-led system. So hospital births are something that I know about. My last birth was also in the hospital in the United States, but it was in a different evidence-based time, which was very interesting. So when I gave birth in 1970, the very first childbirth preparation classes were being taught, and those were Lamaze and Bradley. And there was a very high societal expectation that expectant parents attend a childbirth preparation class. We thought we were very modern doing this because that was not available to our mothers or to our grandparents' generation. We ran to those classes, and they were entirely skills-based. And so we used skills within the evidence-based hospital practice of that day. Like all hospital practices, they can be very fiddly. The things that were done to us and around us are different than the things that are done or around you today, but they are still done to us and around us. This is one of the reasons that there are people who advocate for home birth, because those are not quite done as much as they are in the hospital. A hospital is also a place that's very institutionalized in how it feels and how it looks. So you are moving into an environment that's very different. And it's suggested, and it was suggested in 1990, that you go to the hospital and take a tour of the labor and delivery ward. So as we developed the skills in the early 1970s, the hundreds of mothers and fathers who developed these skills, this is what we knew. The hospital is a place. We are going to give birth. 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth one way or another. We may be at home. We may be in the back seat of the car. We may be in a hospital. We may be in a war zone. We may be in a famine. We may be in a natural disaster. Where we give birth is where we give birth. And as we develop these skills, we develop these skills with that in mind. We didn't develop the skills because of our choices, because there were no choices in 1970. And often we lived in a town where we didn't have a choice. We were going to go to that local hospital. Nowadays, where many local hospitals are closed, we may have to travel to a hospital. So a hospital is a place. That's what Birthing Better Families decided to see it as. It's a place. And in that place, there are going to be assessments, monitoring, and procedures done. That's what they were called in 1970. Now they're called interventions by the natural birth movement. with the implication that they are imposed on you and unnecessary. This is a philosophical discussion, and it's a complicated discussion. Are you, right now, the woman I'm talking to or the man that I'm talking to, prepared to have no medical assessments, monitoring, and procedures done during your pregnancy and during your birth? And if you are, do not go to a doctor, do not go to a midwife, do not go to a hospital, do not have a birth professional come to your home birth. Every birth professional and every place that you birth is required by their professional organizations to follow the guidelines of practice that they consider to be appropriate. I'm not going to get into that discussion. We had these discussions in the 70s, and the conclusion we came to, there was nothing we could do by the time we had our baby. It is what it is, it was what it was, and our birth was going to unfold as it unfolded. So some of Birthing Better families had very strong religious beliefs, and they never went to the hospital. They were always going to have a home birth. Others don't have those firm religious beliefs, chose home births, and some did end up transferring to a hospital. Others of us, like myself, went to the hospital. We did not always like what the hospital did to us or around us. With the Lamaze and Bradley skills, we did our best. Those skills did not adjust, were not adaptable, and were not always sustainable. They were also focused on low-risk women, rather than many of us that were high-risk women. So we never felt confident with the skills. That's why Birthing Better families developed skills that were for all of our births, because 100% of pregnant women will give birth, and each family values their birth. We don't really care how anyone else births. We want to have the best birth possible. And first of all, we want to have a healthy mother and baby. And second of all, we want a positive birth. How do we achieve a positive birth when people are going to fiddle with us? We get on with it. We use skills to get on with it. We in some ways so focus on our skills that as the staff or the doctors or whoever comes and goes in our hospital birth, we just let them do their work and we get on with doing our work, which is the work of doing the activity of birthing our baby. We can't stress that enough. We didn't always like what they did. So for instance, when the staff wanted to put an IV into a woman's arm who was using Birthing Better skills, she'd try to negotiate at what time in her labor they do that, because she was trying to achieve a VBAC from a classical cesarean section in the early 70s. And what she did was to separate her body from her body. She just went, here's my arm. She used her skills. Here's my arm. She used her skills. It took them 12 times to try to get an IV into her arm. She never did anything but use her skills. She used her skills because she wanted to actively birth her baby. And she committed to saying, they're doing whatever they're doing. My job, whether it's in a hurricane, whether it's in an earthquake, whether I'm being shot at, whatever, I'm in a hospital, they're doing these fiddlies, I'm not going to let them throw me off my work. My work is to work with my baby through this activity. That's what we as Birthing Better families did. We tried to with Lamaze, but Lamaze and Bradley were focused on low-risk women, and we were taught in our Lamaze and Bradley classes that they were targeted to low-risk women. So even though most of us went to these classes, in the back of our mind, we knew that they weren't targeted to us. And that was one of the great mistakes that Lamaze and Bradley and New Zealand Grantley Dick Reed made, was to target skills to only a small group of women rather than the 100% of us who get pregnant and then will have to give birth. Had they done that, had since the 1970s. 100% of pregnant women and coaching dads or others known that it is normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills in pregnancy and use those skills in the birth, we would not be having this conversation. Because my generation of women and men who were first introduced to that concept would have told their children, and society would have told the next generation it's normal and natural to self-learn skills in pregnancy, and then to use those skills while you birth your baby, no matter where you birth, no matter who's present, no matter our own personal circumstances or beliefs, no matter our choices or lack of choices or change of choices, or what happens to or around us. If those three obstetricians had targeted their skills to 100% of pregnant women, your generation of women and fathers-to-be and others would now be 3 generations deep in knowing it is normal and natural in pregnancy to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, then use those skills as you do the activity of birthing your baby. No matter the circumstances, we would not be having this conversation. Because that message was not given to us, and those skills were targeted to low-risk women to achieve very narrow goals of a natural birth, which has still never been defined. Go back to our series on natural birth. Does natural mean good, simple, easy, good outcome? That's what it's implied to mean, isn't it? When we hear natural birth, when we hear that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events, we hear that, we interpret that now because of the natural birth movement to me easy, safe, nothing burger, good outcome, copable. That's what we hear it as, but that is not the reality. A normal, natural, and physiological birth in reality, and this is the truth of it, is that anything that might happen could happen. So it is normal and natural and physiological that women throughout time and place have suffered in childbirth. That is the normal, natural, physiological truth. And the suffering is not a problem. It just meant we didn't cope. We didn't have skills. That's why the first childbirth classes were so important, and why there was such a breaking of what could be by this message. We can't go back and blame Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed, because they came forward at a time where all births were falling under the standards of care, the evidence-based practice, and they had a concern that it was too much. So they were articulating it from the viewpoint of being providers. But from the viewpoint of us as people who are having babies, we were suffering. We didn't have skills. And if they had seen that as a primary thing, that women shouldn't have to suffer in childbirth, they would have, I believe, extended it out to 100% of pregnant women, who 100% of us are going to give birth one way or another. And so we wouldn't have had this division in childbirth. And the words natural, normal, and physiological would have included everything, because it does include everything. Are there women who just birth easily? Yes, there are. Are there women who birth easily who have health issues and are very medically high risk? Yes, there are. Are there women who birth easily who are medically high risk and who have either a good outcome or a tragic outcome? Yes, there are. Are there women who struggle in birth, who have no medical risks? Yes, there are. Are there women who struggle in birth with no risks in pregnancy, no risks in childbirth at all, other than they just are not coping, and they're suffering during the normal, physiological, natural pain of labor contractions? Yes, there are. Are there women who have no risks, who do not cope well, who suffer in childbirth, who either have a good or poor outcome? Yes, there are. So therefore, we as Birthing Better Families, at a time where Lamaze and Bradley were giving a message for low-risk women to have a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical intervention, when Birthing Better was developing, we were developing in a juxtaposition to the message. So the idea that low-risk women we were saying all women. That's a big difference. We were using different words. Low-risk women can have a natural birth. We were saying all women can use skills. They were saying low-risk women can have a natural birth and pain-free labor. And we were saying back then, if you have labor pains and you hate labor, use your skills and get on with it. They were saying that they could have a natural birth. And we were saying, we don't know that. We just know we are going to give birth. And it's an activity we're doing with our baby. And we can use skills to do that activity. And 99% of us did that at a hospital birth. And when I gave birth in 1970, I was shaved, I was given an enema, I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I couldn't get out of bed. My husband was just allowed to be with me. In 1982, when I gave birth in the United States, I wasn't shaved, I wasn't given an enema, I was allowed to drink, I was allowed to get out of bed. It was very, very different. However, what had changed in the United States was that the natural birth movement became very strong in the late 70s. They didn't see enough low-risk women achieve natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care, so they dismissed skills. And so the first classes, which were all skill-based, became information-based because it was now all about our choices. We should say no to medical care. So we should make a birth plan that says to people, that says to the hospital staff, that we don't want to have any of the interventions. And this is the list of the interventions we're supposed to say no to. And interventions were the word that was taken over from medical assessments, monitoring, and procedures. So we were told to say no to those 30 things if we went to a hospital. Then we got into arguments with hospital staff who were just following the policies of the hospital. We can't do this. If you're not going to abide by their standards of care, their evidence-based practice, their guidelines to practice, do not go into their space. It's as simple as that. They want to do these things because these assessments, monitoring procedures are the things that separate us from women in traditional communities who don't have this and cannot have risks assessed or risks monitored or procedures done to prevent a risk from becoming a tragedy. When I gave birth in 1970, there were 95% of us labored because risks were considered normal, natural, and physiological. And when we labored, the medical profession and us as women accepted suffering that we didn't cope. And we accepted that some risks would become problems and some problems would become tragedies. Thankfully, more women have risks than become problems, and more problems exist, and many, many fewer tragedies. However, many, many, many more women suffered because they didn't have simple skills to cope with the natural, normal, physiological pain of labor, whether they labored at home or in the hospital. So when the natural birth movement said we should all have choices, they meant we should avoid all of these things. So it set up an argumentative situation, which actually had started in the 70s when Lamaze and Bradley were saying these skills are only for achieving a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care. So every labor and delivery nurse, every hospital, every obstetrician in the United States had that mindset. What they didn't see, because that wasn't the idea, was that when women use these sometimes great skills, sometimes they were very inefficient skills, was that we stopped suffering. They saw that, but they didn't elevate that. Nobody elevated that women were no longer suffering because they were using skills. And that should have been the original goal. Just women should cope better. Women should manage better. We should be able to deal with the activity of doing this birth. We should be able to handle what is done to us or around us or what we feel inside. We should be able to work through this activity. And we should be able to work through this activity, being able to stay on top of what we feel and what's being done to us, and to feel in control. We should be able to do that. And with good skills, we can do that. And that's why Hundreds of fathers and mothers developed birthing better because we wanted to do the activity of birthing our baby better. We didn't necessarily think we were going to have a better birth. We wanted to birth better. And most of us wanted to birth better in the hospital with all of the assessments, all of the monitoring, all of the procedures, and having to deal with the natural occurring pain of labor contractions. And once the cesareans became easier, and do you want to know why they changed from classical cesareans to a bikini cut? Because my generation of women, and you can close your eyes and be horrified at this, we started to wear bikinis. We didn't want to be left with an ugly scar, and the medical profession responded to us. We wanted our husbands with us in a cesarean, so they stopped knocking us out and they started to use spinals and now epidurals. So the medical profession responds to us. Why did they want cesareans to become safer? Because we, as women, who 95% of us who were laboring in 1970 because cesareans were such major surgery, in the generation before, there were even fewer of them. Cesareans are very recent, and they were very major abdominal surgery, and having a VBAC afterwards was very risky. Our uterus could rupture because of the way that they cut the uterine fibers. So we wanted to have VBACs, so having a bikini cut made it safer. But the driving force to having safer cesareans was from all of us 95% of women in 1970 who were laboring when we had risks. And all of us in modern societies are risk averse. We want modern society to prevent us from having the problems that we had prior to modern living. That's why we have immunizations. That's why we have antibiotics. That's why you're taking diabetes medicine or statin medicine or heart problems or doing anything else. You do not want to put your baby or yourself at a risk. So we wanted our twins or our breaches or other problems, those risks reduced. So the cesarean rate increased. And this is why we have such a problem today. Because those 3 obstetricians didn't include all of us. They included low-risk women to achieve narrow goals of a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care. Not enough of us achieved it. And the next group of natural birth advocates advocated we say no to medical care. In a choice-based system, you have to accept women who say yes to more medical care. And women are saying yes to more medical care. We didn't have ultrasounds. We didn't have constant fetal monitoring. We didn't have a shot for ROGAM, Rh negative. So we know that we, as modern women, have led this increase in medical care and this increase in cesareans. But we're still birthing our baby, even if we're driving to the hospital, being prepped, and having surgery. We can still use skills on the way to the hospital, being prepped, and during surgery. Because birthing better families in the 70s, we just accepted it. 100% of pregnant women will give birth, one way or the other. We all got pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth. 100% of us have to do the activity of birthing our baby, no matter where we are, who is present, no matter our circumstances or our beliefs or our choices or lack of choices, our change of choices, or what happens to us or around us at the birth. Every woman is doing the birth by herself. This is just a reality. And we're faced with the truth. You never know what your birth's going to be like, and babies don't come to plan. So each of us is facing an unknown. Each of us has to do the activity as it unfolds. We don't have to like it one damn bit. And if we lack skills, we're going to feel more passive. We're going to feel more overwhelmed. We're going to feel more disconnected and feel that this is a surreal experience that happens to us. And birthing better families didn't want that. We wanted to work together. We wanted to elevate this infrequent activity, this thing that we couldn't redo the next day, this one-off experience, this life-transforming, this dynamic activity. We wanted to transform that into something that we always could feel proud about doing. And we did that not by arguing with the system. We did it by becoming skilled so we could do the activity no matter where we were and what system was imposed on us, or whether we were in a war or in a famine. How about COVID? I mean, really, things changed. You might not have that doula. Your support person might not come with you. You might be faced with the reality that we realize each woman does the activity of birthing her baby alone. We cannot, even though we try, raise our hand and say, I want to take a break for lunch. 15 minutes, maybe I'll come back and do it, promise. Can't do it. We have to do the activity. So, Birthing Better Families said that the idea behind being skilled is simple. 100% of pregnant women will give birth. And it should be absolutely normal and natural to learn some skills that you use to work through the activity of birthing your baby. No matter where, it's your baby's birth. And what does this mean to mothers and fathers who are skilled? And this is one of the profound things that we want to talk to you about today, is that since I gave birth in 1970, all of us who get pregnant are skilled adults. Humans love being skilled. We're all skilled. We're diddly. We teach our children to tie their shoes. They're skilled. Children learn to walk. They're skilled. They get up and they do it. They keep doing it, right? We learn to cook. We learn to be a good lover. We learn to drive a car. We learn to do our job. We learn to mow the lawn. We learn to weed. We learn to plant seeds. We learn to paint. We learn to type. We learn to use the internet. We are skilled. Then we fall pregnant, and suddenly we're swept along, both women and men. So we lose a continuity of self by being of skills. And Birthing Better Families didn't want to lose that continuity of self. So I'm not going to go through the history of how Birthing Better developed, but where we are now in it is that fathers develop 10 skills to develop during pregnancy in the 5 phases of pregnancy, from conception through birth, because you're still pregnant till your baby is born. And those fathers-to-be and mothers-to-be academies are on the Udemy, udemy.com platform. Those are the skills like developing a sense of humor, patience, seeing what needs to be done and doing it, awareness, kindness, developing a second set of eyes, a second set of arms. There are 10 skills that morph and change during the 5 phases of pregnancy. When we use those skills, we become more skilled. And at 24 weeks, when Birthing Better Families felt it was the best time to prepare our body for birth, to let this big object out, because men said exercise and plumbing, big object has to come out of a container, teach me how to open the container. So they developed skills to prepare your body, to create space for this big object, and prepare the birth canal so that soft tissue can soften and open and become pliable. And then we developed skills so that we could cope and manage, stay on top of, and work together as a really good team. We could understand each other in verbal, nonverbal communication. So Birthing Better developed a panoply of skills, is that the right word? That we used from the conception through pregnancy, preparing the body, and as we did the activity of birthing our baby. We developed the continuity of self, the skills that move through this very unique period that's normal, natural, and physiological of pregnancy and childbirth. And we use the skills no matter how our baby's birth unfolded. And when we did, we left birth behind because we did the best we could. We knew that, and we were now ready to bring our skills and our capacity to feel confident and to feel skilled into parenting this newborn. We transformed our lives as individual women and men who are human beings. We transformed our lives as individual mothers and fathers to be, because we wanted to feel skilled during this very unique phase of our lives. And we transformed our lives as couples together, or as people together who were going to parent children. We became skilled throughout this period of time. And when we left this period of time behind us, we left it with pride and dignity, with our capability. So there is a new message in childbirth now that we're giving you. It was a message that should have been formed when I first gave birth in the 70s, from the 60s to the mid-70s. It should have become normal and natural in pregnancy for all pregnant mothers and fathers to self-learn skills and then use those skills to do the activity of birthing their baby. No matter what, it's your birth, your baby's birth. Birth with dignity, pride, capability, confidence. You won't be perfect. I use skills. Lamaze wasn't perfect. When I gave birth last in the 80s, I used these skills. I felt pretty good about them. And so we just do the best we can in and around all of the medical care that we get in the hospital. So I'm going to give you a short wrap-up of my last birth in 1982. I went into labor 8 weeks early. Do you think I planned that? No. I wasn't living near my home. Do you think I planned that? I was living with strangers. Do you think I planned that? I went into a hospital, never seen a doctor, never been there. Do you think I planned that? However, I had developed these skills with hundreds of families, and I had a choice to make as I was driving to the hospital. Do I use these skills, or do I let myself be overwhelmed by the assessments, monitoring procedures that were going to happen because I was in labor 8 weeks early? And I just said, no, I'm not going to have another baby. I'm not going to disappoint myself by becoming passive. I got into the hospital. They wanted to do things to me, assess and monitor and do procedures. I just made a choice of how to use these skills. So every breath in, I expanded in my pelvis. Every breath out, I softened in my pelvis. That's in the directed breathing. I wasn't permitted off the bed. I wasn't permitted to drink. I could have ice chips. I wasn't permitted to eat. That was what it was. So I found the best position for me, and in between contractions, I softened inside my pelvis. And when a contraction would come on, I would get into an asymmetrical kneel, one knee down, 1 foot up, and I would open up between my sit bones. I would feel nauseous, so I'd stick my finger down my throat to try to vomit. And every breath in, I would expand, and every breath out, I would soften. And I would keep those sit bones open, and I would soften down there as best as I could. And I would hate everything that was happening to me or I was feeling. And I had one word for that, and that was fuck, right? I couldn't get anything else out. And then the contraction would end, and I'd go back and I'd repeat it because I couldn't get off this narrow bed. Whenever the labor contractions upped up, I would stick a finger in there and I would check for change. The doctor would say, I have to check you. I couldn't have told the doctor whether I was 3 or 5 centimeters. I could just feel change. So I knew why the labor had ratcheted up. I could ground myself, and I would breathe in and expand, and I would breathe out and soften. I would go around the pelvic clock, which is another one of the skills we developed, and soften. I'd open up. I'd be in an asymmetrical place. I'd keep my sit bones open. I'd keep my sacrum mobile. And my labor went very quickly. And I got into the hospital at 3 in the morning and had him at a little over 5 in the morning. I was not dilated at 3 in the morning, and he was born a little after 5. So my labor notched up very quickly, and whenever it notched up, I'd check. There was change. I knew why. I hated it. I said fuck, fuck, fuck privately, didn't care. I knew it could have a negative voice. I had a positive voice, which was every time I breathed in, I expanded inside my pelvis. Every time I breathed out, I softened inside my pelvis. I got into an asymmetrical position. It wouldn't have mattered if I had to stay lying down. I would have put pillows between my knees. I would have felt those sit bones open. I would have softened all around the rectum. I would have done all of these skills. It was my baby's birth. I still had an IV in me. They were still concerned about a premature baby. I understood that. They had things they needed to do. I was in their space. I didn't argue with them. I invited them to do what they needed to do. I did what I needed to do, which was to do the activity of birthing this kid. And they were amazed. They were so amazed that they wanted to, when I felt that I was fully dilated, because I checked myself, I could feel my cervix behind the pubic bone. The doctor checked me and said, yes, they didn't want me to birth there because he was premature. Who knows why? So they put me on a gurney cart. They took me down there. They asked if everybody on the ward could come and watch me. I said, sure, why not? Didn't care. And I got on that gurney. I put one knee down, one knee up, held onto the gurney, opened up, kept doing my skills. I never stopped using my skills. Didn't like it, never liked it. Don't like birth. Used my skills. Got into the theater, and they said to me, how would you like the bed to be? And I thought, my God, they're asking me to decorate. I didn't know, never been there before. So they put the back up. The thing was like that. There was too much of a distance here. Sat on the edge of it. I was asymmetrical, so one leg was slightly down. I was slightly over. I began to massage down there. They'd never seen anybody do it, and I got dry because my baby was down in my birth canal. I mentioned that. I will still today see this nurse go down to the end of the bed, a cabinet, pick up a tube, come back the other side and give me some KY jelly. So I used the KY jelly and I massaged between contractions and then just kept my head on there when I had a pushing contraction. That's what I did. They didn't fiddle with me because the policies had changed from 1970, 1982 in the United States. You can do this in the hospital. They're not going to stop you. Just do it. They're amazed. When I gave birth in 1970, labor and delivery nurses and obstetricians saw 8 out of 10 women and fathers-to-be coping well. They saw that we no longer suffered. But that wasn't the goal of the natural birth movement and these obstetricians. It was a goal for low-risk women to have pain-free labor without medical care and a natural birth. Missed the goal. The goal should have been don't suffer, because that's what they saw. And then when it shifted over to information and skills were no longer taught and actively dismissed, that women know how to birth, women need to be left alone. We didn't want to be left alone. That's why we wanted our husbands with us. We wanted somebody to help us cope and not suffer. So when they changed over to information, skills were lost. And I can tell you that maybe labor and delivery nurses and obstetricians see maybe 1 out of 20 skilled women. They'll see some women have fine births, but those women, if you ask them, are saying, I concentrate on my breathing, concentrate on my relaxation. And you can have tubes coming out every single one of your holes. Just get on with your work. Get on with doing the activity of birthing your baby. So now they don't see skilled women, right? And when you are overwhelmed, when you're stressed, when you're scraggly, when you're hot, or when you're pale, or when you're moaning, or you're groaning, care providers don't want you to suffer. So they come in and give you pain relief. And if your labor doesn't move along, then they want your birth to be over with, because they know that the longer your birth goes on, the more likely your baby is going to get tired and stressed, and so are you. And it's easier to do a cesarean. It's safer for a baby to have a cesarean done, and women cave. And then 6 months, 18 months later, they think they've had an unnecessary cesarean. We've caused it. We've caused it because we as women said to each other, even though these 3 obstetricians were men, we repeated as women, if you're low risk and learn these skills, you can have a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical interventions. And then we as women promoted skills are unessential. We just need to say no to medical care and argue with them. And that natural birth is the ideal birth. This is what a group of midwives in New Zealand identified as a profession that serves 98% of the women in New Zealand. They identified this as an ideal birth. Women are doing this to each other. We have to stop. So this is a talk on hospital birth. It's a place with skills. Use your skills in that place. You will have assessments, monitoring procedures. That goes with the territory. If you don't want them, don't go. If you go, you're going to have them, just like I had them. They let me birth my baby myself with an 8-week premature baby because of my behaviors, because of what they saw me do, how they saw me behave. They didn't know in my mind I hated it, and I was going F, F, F the whole time. That wasn't important to them. What was important to them was my behavior. And when I behaved as though I knew how to birth, they stood around, because they're going to stand around anyway, or they're going to come in every 4 hours or 2 hours, and the rest of the time you're on your own. So get on with it. You will birth better when you use skills. We don't care if you use the birthing better skills. We know why they're an evolution of Lamaze and Bradley. We know why hypnobirthing, calm birth, or all the other birthing skills methods are still targeting low-risk women and don't always adjust or adapt or aren't sustainable for all births. We know that, but you have a choice. It just should be normal and natural when you're pregnant to learn skills and use your skills. And so this is the end of my yabby-yab about hospital births. Doesn't matter where you have a baby. Doesn't matter what they're doing to you. Doesn't matter what you're feeling. Get on with it, because you got pregnant to have a baby. Getting this baby out of your pregnant body is an activity. Do the activity with skills. And if you're privileged enough to have somebody with you, learn skills that work for both of you from both angles. That's what you need to do. And pass on this message. This is a new childbirth trend. 100% of pregnant women will give birth. We're all doing the activity. It's natural and normal to learn some skills and use some skills. That's what we should be saying to each other. That's what we should be doing. And that's how we can change childbirth today. Thanks for listening.